Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Master Planning in Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations. My name is Katie and I'll be the facilitator today. This is a pre-recorded webinar, so if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question area in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll have a response for you within 24 hours after this webinar ends. This session will be posted on our blog as well as shared with you later this week. Now, I would like to introduce our presenter today, Kaylee Akinya, Senior Solutions Specialist on our Dynamics 365 F&O team. Kaylee, I'll pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. So as Katie mentioned, I'm going to be talking to you today about master planning. I'm going to briefly touch on planning optimization, but I won't show anything in the system because there really isn't anything to show in the system. So I'm going to dive right into our agenda. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about planning optimization, some key differences between the legacy master planning, as well as some things to just be aware of in terms of differences with how it executes and how it runs. I'm then going to get into some meat and potatoes on planning concepts. I hope this presentation, or the goal of this presentation, is to help users get familiar with master planning in F&O and provide some valuable lessons learned and insights that I've learned over the years. I was demand planner for many years, and I have now implemented master planning for several businesses using F&O, and there are always ways it can be done differently and always things that I learn every time we do it. I always feel like we could improve the process a little bit, and there's always things that surprise me. So I hope that this presentation provides you with some insight and sort of provides a little bit of a foundation for either new users learning how to use master planning or folks looking to transition off of a legacy system onto the one that is used in F&O. So the key planning concepts that I will cover in addition to planning optimization is the static versus the dynamic master plan. I will go into quite a bit of detail about the net requirements page. And then I'm going to finish up with some key terminology, and I will provide some resources for you to use at the end of this presentation. All right, planning optimization. So as I mentioned, there's nothing for me to really show in the system for planning optimization because planning optimization is something that is enabled. It is a hot topic right now in the planning world, especially in F&O. And planning optimization essentially is a change to how F&O executes the MRP batch job. So it's an expansion on the legacy master planning in terms of its functionality and its dynamic configuration, but it also streamlines the way the system runs MRP in the background. If anyone has used the legacy master planning system, you know that that master planning batch job can be kind of a monster. It runs, depending on your data set size, it can run for several hours, usually needs to be scheduled to run during off working hours overnight or early in the morning so that it doesn't interfere with other processes. Planning optimization has really resolved that issue. The batch job that used to run could interfere with other things happening in the background in the system, and planning optimization has really solved that problem. So that's the big key difference. However, there are other dynamic configurations that have been added to planning optimization to allow the users or whoever is configuring planning to better tailor it to suit your business. So the reason this is so important is because all new F&O environments will only be able to use planning optimization. The legacy master planning functionality has been officially deprecated by Microsoft, so we do recommend that everyone currently looking into upgrading use planning optimization. Unfortunately, it's not a one-to-one direct conversion from the legacy master planning. However, there are several tools available to facilitate the transition and to do a complete risk analysis before switching over. This is going to be incredibly important because obviously we know that planning has a big impact on the system and all the transactions within the system. So leveraging these tools is important, and having personally used them myself, they are actually pretty good. So definitely recommend anyone looking to upgrade leverage the risk analysis and the tools before switching over. As I mentioned earlier, the key differences between master planning and planning optimization resides primarily in how the system executes MRP, but there are some key configurations that weren't previously available that will allow you to make your MRP more accurate. And I'm not going to get into all of those, there are several, but the important thing I'd like to point out though is that just because planning optimization is a new tool and there is new functionality, it does not change the core planning concepts. So you don't have to relearn how to do master planning in F&O. You don't have to learn a whole new set of functionality. It's not like that at all. All of the main concepts that you would be familiar with in the past using the legacy master planning, like item coverage groups, master plans, time fences, all that stuff remains. It simply has added additional functionality so that it can be more tailored to additional planning scenarios instead of sort of a cover-all for everything that needs to be planned. There also, in addition to some of those those new configurations, there are some additional features that they're constantly coming out with new features for planning optimization that can be enabled. I've included a screenshot of those features here on the right-hand side of the screen. It's available in the feature management workspace. And so you can review those and see if any of those new features are available for or would be helpful for your business. So there are several of them that are, I know if anyone has used the legacy master planning that I know would be extremely useful that I wished we had had before. Leveraging positive days, using transport days, anything with transfer orders in general. There's some pretty cool features available. Additionally, I have also included links to Microsoft resources at the end of this presentation. They will be available to you in the follow-up email when this webinar is completed. So definitely take a look at those. There are links that explain how to install planning optimization, and then a link also to those tools that I mentioned that will help you transition or upgrade from legacy master planning to the new planning optimization. All right, and so as I mentioned, the planning optimization, while it's different, doesn't change the core concepts that planning is built on in F&O. And so today this presentation will be focusing primarily on those core foundational concepts and some of the tools in F&O directly that can be used by a planner or by users to troubleshoot or research transactions in the system. So these are sort of planning constants. And so that's what the rest of this presentation will cover. Okay, first we are going to talk about the master plans. The master plans remain in use regardless of whether you're using the legacy master planning or planning optimization. There are standard configurations, again, like coverage groups, master plans, and these planning basics that will help you be a more effective planner and allow you to better leverage the tools available in Dynamics. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I'm going to navigate to the master plan setup. So this is located in the master planning module under the setup tab, plans and master plans. So you can see right away I've got two plans set up here, the dynamic plan and the static plan. I've added the descriptions to be a little bit more helpful. Generally, these are considered the dynamic plan is short term and the static plan is long term. In general, the master plan is where you specify settings for your MRP batch job that best align with your business needs. So whether your plan needs to look at a 3-month snapshot or a 6-month snapshot, your plan here would include those values. It would also include things like how is your forecast consumed? Does it actually get consumed by sales orders or does it remain intact regardless of transactions in the systems? And there are so many settings here, we're not going to go into all of them. There are lots of levers to pull with planning. The key settings though with the static and the dynamic plan are the key differences, excuse me, are this time fence. This is essentially how far does this plan need to look? And this is sort of where the short term and long term comes into play. The short term plan has a time fence of only 14 days. The long term plan has a time fence of 60 days. So it's important to understand that this little number here has a big impact on the results that you would see from running the MRP batch. The static plan also is considered throughout the workday, static, sort of implied in the name, throughout the workday will remain unchanged. Nothing about the static plan will change until the master plan is run. Excuse me, the master planning batch job, the MRP batch job will run. The dynamic plan, however, again, the name implies it, will change throughout the day depending on the demand that is coming into the system. So if throughout the day there are sales orders coming in, there are production orders, there are service orders, whatever the demand that your business has, this dynamic plan will reflect that in real time. Now, the purpose of having both plans, the static and the dynamic plan, is to allow you to gauge over a given time the impact of the current demand and compare it to your existing plan. So the static plan would represent, what you had planned to produce or to purchase, this week, let's say. And the dynamic plan will reflect what the actual demand is. So if there is if there's an unplanned spike in demand for a certain product, this can result in certain raw materials being consumed before their planned restock. This would in turn trigger MRP to generate or accelerate, meaning move up, the supply for those raw materials. And you would see that in real time using the dynamic plan. And later in this webinar, I'll show you where you would essentially view the results for each of these plans. And then as a planner, you can go in and compare those, compare those results and decide what you want to do and how you want to handle, any spikes in demand that were previously not planned for. So as a planner knows, the crucial data point for any planner is to be able to compare what you had originally planned versus what's actually happening. Meaning, did you plan sufficiently to meet your demand, or was there an anomaly that caused you to run out of stock? If so, seeing the difference and the timing of that spike is crucial to know if you need to adjust your overall plan for the following year or the following season, or if you need to simply plan for this one anomaly, this one large order that isn't something that you would normally have to account for. And having the difference between the dynamic plan and the static plan is exactly what provides you with that data point. The difference from the system perspective is quite simple. It's really these two configurations. One I've already mentioned, which is this time fence. One looks out 60 days. You could make this as much as 180 days. It's really up to you. And the dynamic plan is always short term because it's looking at what you need to have today or tomorrow or next week. It's very short term. It wouldn't be helpful to have them both be 60 days or 180 days. It sort of defeats the purpose. The other big thing to note is in the static plan, the long-term plan, you can see that we're using a forecast model. We're using a supply forecast as well as a demand forecast, and then we have a method to reduce the forecast. In this case, it's dynamic, using transactions to reduce the forecast. The forecast is, of course, what the planner will have originally scheduled to provide, and then the demand is what's actually being requested, sales orders or production orders or whatever it is. And the difference between your forecast and your demand tells you exactly what you need to actually produce or provide for your business. So that's the key difference between these two plans. The dynamic plan is short term, doesn't include a forecast. The static long-term plan is longer term and provides a forecast. All right. I'm going to jump back to my PowerPoint. All right, the next thing we're going to jump into, and this is going to have a lot more detail in it, is the net requirements page. Anyone who does planning understands that sometimes you need to drill into specific items to really understand what's happening, and the best place by far to do that is the net requirements page. Sometimes there's, especially if you're planning for thousands of items, you won't be able to understand what's happening, what MRP is trying to do for all of those items at one time. You need to drill down into a specific item or a specific subset of items in order to understand what's actually happening. So the net requirements can be accessed from any released product. So we're going to go ahead and navigate to the released products. I'm going to go ahead and just select this first one here. This is just a main product, standard product. If I go up here to the plan tab under the requirement section, I'm going to go ahead and click on net requirements. I am going to select the static plan. This is what I was saying earlier, where you'll see where the difference in the plans comes into play. You can see we also have a forecast plan that will allow you to see your plan sort of unhindered from any transactions of any kind. The dynamic plan is, of course, the one that shows real-time demand, and the static plan is the long-term plan. For this example, I'm going to show you the static plan. This is a great way to troubleshoot if you have a rogue purchase order or a rogue production order that MRP is suggesting and you need to find out exactly what's driving it. The net requirements page is also a great way to sort of trial and error your master planning configurations, because you can take one item, like I mentioned, and sort of based on what you've selected in your coverage group and your plan details, see what the system generates, and you can do it over and over again for a single item, so that you understand what the impact of your time fences is, for example, or the impact of consuming transactions is. This is exactly the window where you would want to do that. So it's important to note that from this net requirements window, you can run the same as the master planning batch job. So the master planning batch job is, again, it's a batch job you would normally set up to run in the background for all of your items. From net requirements, you can actually execute that batch job, but just for the item that we're drilled into. So to do that, you select the plan that you'd like to run master planning for, and then in the upper left-hand corner, we're going to click update and we're going to click master planning. I'm not going to do that. It can take several minutes to run. I've already run it for this item, but that's how you would execute it. And you can run it as many times as you want, because in this particular window, it's only going to run for the item that we're drilled into. So it's kind of a safe way to test and retest and retest and review the results. All right, so in this upper section, you can see I've got two warehouses listed. This one only has on hand, this one has several other transactions in it. You will always see, you will only see warehouses that have planning transactions available. If a warehouse doesn't show up, it doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't used. It simply means that they're in this current planning snapshot, there weren't requirements or transactions or inventory to be displayed. So that's an important thing to note. You can also view the item coverage details from here for this item. I can see that this item has, here I'll make this a little bigger. I can see that this item has a primary vendor set. I can see that the time fence is 100 days. For this particular coverage group, this is obviously different than what we set on our master plan. I can see the coverage code. These are all really standard planning settings. And this is also what I mean by this window is very helpful for troubleshooting or doing a trial and error on your configurations, because you can come in here and see exactly what these settings are, run master planning, and see if you're getting the expected results for the warehouse and the items that you're running master planning for. The other thing that's helpful in this upper section here is this period tab. This will show you sort of a summary of all of the transactions based on the time periods that you've defined either in your production calendar or your fiscal calendar, and it will show you the accumulated demand and supply required for this item over the course of whatever time you've selected. So this is really important and really helpful and can be really nice if you're troubleshooting. It's also worth noting, any F&O user knows this, you can export any of this to Excel. You can either come up here to the Office icon, export it to Excel, either net requirements or quantity. You can also, of course, export right here, export marked rows or export all rows for either this top section or this bottom section, and then you can do whatever you need to do with it in Excel. Top tip. All right, so we're going to go ahead and take a look at this warehouse 11, and we're going to look at this bottom section because this is where we get a lot of our transactional detail. This is where you can really see the meat of what MRP has provided for a single item. You can immediately see that there are some planned purchase orders. We've got a production line and we've got a firmed purchase order. So planned purchase order tells me that this item's default order type is purchase order. Therefore, to replenish the supply, MRP is suggesting additional purchase orders. That's why these are called planned. To see that, if I drill back just to confirm, and I go up here to the default order settings in the item, I can see that the default order type is purchase order. Right away, if you were expecting production orders instead of purchase orders, this is the setting that you would need to change. Okay, I'm going to go back to net requirements. Net requirements will show quantities, it will show dates. I have to toggle back to my static plan. It will show quantities, it will show dates, it will show action messages. They are quite literal though. Some businesses rely on dates going past due to know when something is urgent. This is really normal. In this scenario, the system would tell you to cancel the PO and combine it with supply for another PO. This isn't always the best approach. It just depends on your business. So the net requirements window would allow you to see that and tailor that to your needs. MRP is a machine that's using simply the data points that are provided to it to produce results. And so if something doesn't look as expected, it's because somewhere in the system there is a data point that it's using. Maybe, again, if it's an accurate date, or if it's a transaction that shouldn't be there that should have been canceled, it can affect your MRP. So just keep that in mind. That leads me to my point about the action messages, which are quite literal. If your standard business process is to leverage past due purchase orders to know what to expedite, MRP action messages are going to tell you to do all kinds of things that you don't want to do. So it's hit or miss with those. You can always turn them on and ignore them and see if they are useful. It's really your call. This form will also show any firmed transactions. So firmed meaning not planned. Firmed meaning it's a real PO. It's been confirmed. It's been sent to a vendor and is actually pending supply. Remember that planned transactions are only suggestions. Every time you run MRP, they will be regenerated. So these planned PO numbers here, if I were to rerun master planning, it would give it a whole new set of numbers. But if nothing else changes, it would provide the same results in terms of quantities and dates required. This is a real purchase order. You can see it just is called a purchase order. It will continue to show up here because it's a true transaction. It is a firmed PO. This is what I mean by if you have a purchase order that is past due or that is late or that should have been canceled and you are expecting new planned orders. If this PO hasn't been canceled and it's still within the time fences for the master plan, the system is going to think that you have sufficient supply inbound to provide for your demand of this item. So if you need to go and clean that up, net requirements is a window that you could review those things in. Depending on how your time fences are configured, not all transactions will show up. So for example, if you have a PO, sort of like I just mentioned, that's 120 days old, but your time fence is only 60 days, MRP will no longer consider it as inbound supply. So if you're reviewing net requirements and you're expecting that, why is it suggesting a new PO? I know we have one in the system. It's probably because MRP no longer sees it. And a simple way around that is to change the date, especially if it's past due. You can't receive anything in the past anyways. There's a few ways that that can be managed, but just keep that in mind when you're reviewing net requirements and when you're running MRP. So another line that you can see here in this lower section is called the BOM line. This line type tells me that this item is part of a BOM for another item. If for some reason this doesn't look right or is not what you expected and you need to verify which bill of materials this item is being used on, you can drill back to the item, go up to the Engineer tab, and under the BOM section, click on Where Used. This will show you all the BOMs, if there are multiple, where this item is being used. And so this is helpful, again, if you're troubleshooting or you're seeing unexpected results, because if the demand for this BOM or the item this BOM is for, it will generate child demand for the items within the BOM. So if the BOM has 100 items on it, and a sales order is created for the main BOM item, MRP will see that, and when it runs, and on hand is not available to produce the main BOM item, it will suggest planned purchase orders to fulfill the production order for that BOM. So we see that reflected here under my static plan. You can see that reflected here. What's driving these purchase orders is the need to use it on a production order for the item that this item is on a BOM for. So it's kind of confusing, but that's how the relationship between the transactions that show up here are showing you. And you can see that also reflected in the negative quantity because these purchase orders are fulfilling these BOM lines. And so you can quickly see sort of the breadcrumbs that you need to follow to see what is driving your demand and your supply. And that's why this tool specifically is the best for any planning activities you need to do, especially for setting it up for the first time. The system is only generating information, again, based on other information in the system. So if your business regularly has inaccurate transactional information, MRP is going to be less accurate. This can be a real hurdle when implementing planning for the first time, but it's also something that's important to keep an eye on. So if you've got production orders, for example, that are not being closed or not being finished in a timely manner, you will see demand in MRP consistently showing up. And so this, you can't just be firming purchase orders all the time. You need to be reviewing them to make sure that the demand is actually true. Otherwise, your production schedule can get wildly off. MRP is not intelligent. It doesn't know how your business normally handles things. If it's not reflected in the system, MRP won't see it. I've often found that MRP is doing exactly what we've configured it to do, but our understanding of how things are configured changes. And so it helps us sort of tweak things. And again, this net requirements window is really the most helpful place to do that. Okay, so I mentioned that this BOM line is being driven by this purchase order. How did I know that? There's a little sneaky button down here that's really easy to miss called pegging. If I expand this, it's going to show me what demand generated or triggered the suggested supply for the line that I've selected above. So if I select this planned purchase order line in this middle section here, you see this lower section under pegging changed. That's because each line was generated by MRP for a reason. It's driven by demand on some level, whether it be a production order or a sales order. In this example, it's from a production order for a BOM. And regardless of how the demand was generated, this pegging window will show you exactly what's driving the results here. So you need to know why is the system suggesting I buy 219 of this item? And you look down here and you can see, oh, it's a BOM line. So this item is used on a BOM for another item that has a requirement for 219. So that's exactly why it's showing and suggesting that you make that. You start to learn that when you're using this window enough. I knew that this line reflected this line because of the quantity and because of the date. It becomes really clear. The requirement of the item will match the requirement of the supply if there's no lead times set up. It gets more complicated when you have lead times set up. If you've got, if the item that our item is used on a BOM for has a lead time of 30 days and the vendor supplying us this item has a lead time of 60 days, then it's going to be a minimum of 90 days that we need to order our item ahead of time in order to provide it for the production order. So your requirement date would reflect those lead times. It sort of works backwards from those lead times. So the dates can be really confusing if you're not fully understanding what each one of them is setting. Furthermore, if you need to do additional sort of drilling into this planned purchase order line and understand what's driving that demand, you can click on this inquiries button here and click on explosion. And this will tell you, it will drill into the BOM for the parent item for this item. So, and I apologize, I'm using the word item a lot. Our item is used on a BOM for another item. The explosion will tell you the demand for that parent item. So we can see the total demand here is 225. This is based on all of these production orders here, and you'll notice this product is not the product we've been drilling into. We've been drilling into item 1000, but this is the item that our item is used on. And so this is 219 plus 3 plus 3 gives us our total demand of 225. So the explosion gives you yet another level of detail for reviewing what's driving your planned purchase orders for your main item and for which warehouse and for which site. And so in our case, the BOM line here for 219, it's not the total of 225 due to the difference in dates. It's saying you need 219 on this date, and so it's suggesting that a purchase order be created right away to fulfill the 219, but in general, 225 are required for all of the production orders that were created for this parent item that our item is used on. So timing is really key. The explosion can be really helpful. I would certainly recommend to anyone new to planning or new to the system become familiar with what this is telling you. And this little drop down here is just a really helpful way. We're looking at our item 1000. I expand this and it's telling me what item this is used on. Similarly, if we were to go to this item here and drill down, we would see the opposite, right? We would see item 1000 as part of the demand for this item because it's required to fulfill that finished product, part of the production order or the BOM for that item. You can see there's several tabs up here at the top that provide information that tells you different things. There's a Gantt chart, which can be really helpful. There's critical on-hand inventory, which gives you sort of a summary of both the finished good and our item. So that can also be a really useful thing. It gives you a full accumulated inventory after, a net transactions are being done. This again will be per site and per warehouse, so you can view them as many times as you need. I've provided, again, additional links for Microsoft example scenarios for net requirements in the slide deck, and that will also be available in the follow-up email, which you can access for further testing. Working through specific examples is by far the most effective way to learn the planning module in Dynamics. It can be super complicated and tedious if your data set is too large, but picking a simple item and seeing how it behaves and learning which levers to pull will be really helpful when scaling up to a larger planning solution. And specifically, I mean, those dates I mentioned, as soon as you start adding the element of lead times and then safety margin days in terms of receipts, you can look at the net requirements tab and say, why are these dates the way they are? What is driving those dates? And it can be really helpful to understand where those are coming from on a single item before you're looking at all the other items. Okay, and now I'm going to jump back into some key terminology. I'd like to just summarize these terms because, and there are a lot of important terms in planning, but in terms of the things that get most mixed up with each other, these are really the biggies, and understanding them will allow you to better search for help when you're looking for Microsoft documentation. It will help you understand what the system is trying to do with each one of them, because each one of them will impact the results for MRP, and it can generate different transactions. And so understanding the differences between them is really crucial. So pegging, we talked about pegging. Pegging is the system's association between the supply and the demand. We saw that in the net requirements window in that bottom, the very most bottom section. Pegging is how the system ties up the demand and provides the corresponding supply. So if there isn't sufficient supply, it will suggest more. And the pegging is just, I don't even want to call it a soft reservation because it's not. It's the system's correlation between what's driving demand and driving supply based on your demand. So that's what we saw in the net requirements window. Marking. Marking is like pegging, but marking is used to show how demand is expected to be covered in master planning. Marking is more permanent than pegging. Pegging has no bearing on priority. Marking, however, can be manually applied by a user. Pegging happens entirely by the system. Marking is when you want to, let's say, you have a sales order and you know that a purchase order is coming in for this item and you really want it to fulfill this one sales order that you're working on. You can mark the purchase order against the sales order, and when MRP runs, it will reflect that demand against that supply. However, it can be overridden and you can configure MRP to ignore marking and simply prioritize based on usually requirement date. So instead of, if your sales order has a requirement date of 2 months from now and it's marked against a purchase order, but there's other sales orders whose dates are sooner, the system will still prioritize those purchase orders for the sales orders that come sooner. So marking is the big difference between marking and pegging is that it can be manually marked by a user, but it still isn't viewed by MRP as like a hard mark. Reservation, unlike marking, is a hard link between supply and demand. It's the most permanent of the three options, and it will supersede pegging or marking. Users can put reservations against specific orders, like the example I just gave, and an inbound purchase order. And even under normal circumstances, the system's planning algorithm will completely ignore what the requirement dates are and prioritize reservation first. So reservation takes the highest priority. It's a hard link between supply and demand, and it can be applied by users. You have to be really careful with this because there are settings to allow for automatic reservation. That can be either in order of requirement date or in order of um, certain customers. Maybe certain customers who place orders of a certain size get a higher priority. If you aren't aware that this is happening, or if users put a reservation on an order and didn't mean to, or forget to remove it if that demand goes away, it can really impact MRP because MRP will continue to hold up supply or inbound purchase orders or production orders against that demand. And if that demand isn't needed anymore, it's going to suggest more supply to fulfill other demand. So you do need to keep an eye on reservations, but in MRP, in the net requirements page, it's really obvious when something is hard reserved. And that is the same place I would go to troubleshoot anything that's hard reserved because it looks funky if you don't know that it's happening. Okay, here are the resources that I promised. As I mentioned, there's some links to the planning documentation, these first two links. This first one is planning optimization, how to install it, system prerequisites, all that good stuff. This next one is how to use it, how to convert off of the legacy planning onto planning optimization. This includes some of the tools to do that risk assessment that I mentioned earlier, some of the summaries that your configurations and how they would look different with planning optimization. I would certainly suggest reading them. Planning optimization is officially, I know I mentioned this before, but it's important. You will no longer be able to use legacy master planning. So anyone using the old planning needs to convert and look into converting, and any net new environments will only be able to use planning optimization going forward. So these articles are really helpful. And then this last link is those net requirement example scenarios. Practice scenarios that I mentioned. Microsoft actually has a really great set of examples that you can run through use cases that will show requirement dates and what the expectation is on the quantity and the lead time and all that good stuff. So definitely check that out. It's very, very helpful. All right, that's all I have for today. Thank you for listening. I will say that planning is a deceptively complex beast, and there are a lot of levers that can be pulled, and the best way to learn really is through trial and error. That's why I mentioned taking one item or a handful of items, start with simple scenarios, and try to understand what the system is doing and build from there. That's by far going to be the most effective way to learn how to configure it for what your business needs. If anyone has any questions, please reach out to me either through my email or on LinkedIn or on Yammer. I'm always happy to talk through planning scenarios.
Thanks, Kaylee. If anyone does have any questions, please enter them into the question area in the control panel. And if you have submitted a question, we will follow up with you through email within 24 hours after this webinar is posted. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.